Hello, 5th grade. We're on Domain 8, Native Americans, Lesson 3, Native American Storytelling. Our objectives are to compare and contrast characters of two Native American stories and to use a graphic organizer to identify an argument and supporting evidence in a persuasive essay. Our key vocabulary for today are remnant is a leftover piece or a small part of a whole. A scout is someone who is sent somewhere in advance of others to gather information. It is also to observe someone or something in order to gather and report information about that person or thing. A band is a group of people, animals, and things that act together to achieve a common purpose. A council is a group of people chosen to lead or give advice. And awaken is, in the Sioux culture, a natural superpower. So let's do some chapter review. What animal did the Europeans introduce to the Native Americans, and how did this affect the way Native Americans in the Great Plains lived? They introduced horses. The introduction of horses transformed the way they were able to travel, hunt, and fight. What is the purpose of a vision quest? Members of tribes throughout the Great Plains and other regions used it as a coming-of-age ceremony in which a young person sought to understand his or her purpose in life. Why was there no greater symbol of connection between people and nature for the Great Plains than the buffalo? The buffalo was used for everything for them to survive. It was for them to eat and use every part of the buffalo. Okay, we're going to independently read the chapter for today. Our word work for today is remnant. The horse was easy to identify because he always wore a saddle and the remnants of a blue silk blanket on his back. Remnant means a leftover piece or a small part of a whole, and it is a noun. So now we're going to identify the main argument and supporting reasons of a sample essay. So this is the sample essay that I have provided as well. So making sure that we figure out what the main argument is. So let's start by rereading the whole thing. Nature and its resources were very important to the Great Plains tribes. Native Americans who lived in the Great Plains were dependent on things from nature to survive and thrive. I think this image best shows the relationship between Native Americans and the land because it shows how important the Great Plains habitat was in shaping the tribe's way of life. This image shows a young man working in front of his family's teepee. His clothing and moccasins are made from the hides of buffalo. The teepee sits on the dusty ground of the Great Plains. Tall wooden sticks support the teepee cover, and you can see them through the opening of the top of the teepee. A hide is being dried in the sun using a support made of sticks and thread. In this image, you can see the dry, dusty landscape of the Great Plains. It could sometimes be hard for tribes of the Great Plains to find food because of the harsh habitat. The characteristics of this land greatly influenced the way of life for Native Americans in the Great Plains. Over time, the tribes of the Great Plains had to adapt to the environment. Buffalo was the largest animals in the Great Plains. The tribes depended on the buffalo in almost every way. One way they used buffalo was to make the covers for teepees, like the one in this image. Teepees were an important part of the way of life of Native Americans who lived in the plains. Teepees were made from the resources they could find in nature. They used wood to make sturdy poles for the teepee. They used buffalo hide to make durable covers to stretch over the poles, and they used sinew from the buffalo to sew the covers together. The teepee in this image shows how important the animal and plant were to the Native Americans of Great Plains. Not only did Native Americans use buffalo hides to create teepee covers, but they also used the hides for their clothing. In this image, the clothing and moccasins the man was wearing were made from the buffalo hide. Native Americans used the whole buffalo to survive and thrive. Everything had a purpose. The buffalo is an important part of the Great Plains landscape was important to the Great Plains Native Americans' way of life. The harsh landscape made it difficult to survive in the Great Plains. By using an important part of nature, the buffalo, Native Americans of the Great Plains adapted to the environment and were able to thrive. I chose this image because it shows how important buffalo and the natural habitat of the Great Plains were to the Native American way of life. So what is the main argument of that? I think this image best shows the relationship between Native Americans and the land because it shows how important the Great Plains habitat was in shaping the tribe's way of life. Remember, the main argument is my opinion, so this is my opinion on the topic. So now you're going to identify the reasons and evidence the writer used to support the argument. The second paragraph is the description of the image, and it's meant to help the reader understand what the image is. So the second paragraph is not evidence. That's just describing the image. In the third paragraph, we talked about the harsh Great Plains habitat. This evidence supports that they had to adapt to the harshness of that environment. So you're going to read through paragraph 4 and 5 and identify the evidence in those paragraphs and explain how this evidence supports that argument. So you're going to reread the passage here and read paragraph 4 and 5 and determine what those are, what those evidence pieces are and how they help the argument. And that is the end of today's lesson. We will see everyone next time.